himself actually discovered this tomb, and it was purely by accident. It was not, they weren't even looking for it. So it was completely by accident when they found it. So here you have this 17-year-old kid. And I mean, in 1922, someone who's 17 then, it's a lot different than 17 today, right? I mean, by the age of 14, my grandmother had already had pretty much what's equivalent to a grade 12 education today. She left school. She could read, she could write, she had beautiful penmanship, she was really good at her maths. And I don't even think kids today learn on the same level. So, him being, Carter being exposed to a good education growing up, and by the age of 17 is likely more in tune with kids who have graduated college today. Right. So, and the maturity level was much different then too. I mean, at 17, many people were already, they'd either been in the First World War, or they as soldiers, they may even have been officers, and or they've gone on. So much different than today. So we're looking at this. So 17 then is probably more equivalent to 27 today. But they worked on the site for 10 years. So that would have made him 27 years old when they had finished excavating Tut's tomb. So, it's interesting that they always portray him as this older person on TV. And I don't know why. Is it because they don't think that's anybody's going to buy a 17-year-old doing this? But this is the case. So that's one of the interesting aspects that gets overlooked all the time, was his age. Some of the other things too were the techniques and the knowledge. It's still really new in 1922. I mean, the word archaeology doesn't even come into our vernacular until that time. Before that, anybody who was doing that type of excavation or work, they were known as antiquarians. They were not called archaeologists. So kind of a cool, cool thing to know that through history, things have changed. But Carter found this site, and as we know, it sort of snowballs from there. Right. So they discovered this site. Now, your family member, were they on the dig, or did they work for Carnarvon just
Oh no,
solely
he
for
just worked. He was Carnarvon's gardener at the
Gardner?
estate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did they, was it at the time that this was going on, or?
Yeah. Once they had dug all the rubble out of the stairway and got into the tomb,
Okay.
and there was the famous line, can you see anything? Yes,
Mhm.
wonderful things. They
Right,
they got
right.
in, they saw the treasures, and it was when Carnarvon returned to England after the tomb had been opened, that
Hmm.
he had these beams with him that he had taken.
Right. And, and here's the funny thing. I mean, many years later, we sort of know that, I mean, there's been movies, like I said, movies about this. There's all kinds of, sort of the curse of the mummy, the victims of the mummy, all of these things. I mean, it's really more made for movies, and anybody that understands, you know, Egypt and burials and tombs, the curses that were supposedly on the tomb, of course, they weren't really curses. I mean, they weren't curses to condemn anybody. It was more to keep. I mean, there's an idea that you didn't want people to break into a tomb, right? You wanted to keep that tomb. So there was, those types of things, kind of beware, sort of things. I think how it sort of propelled itself forward was, of course, we have to remember that even in 1922, you know, being of Caucasian persuasion in Egypt, there was so much tomb raiding and tomb robbing going on that they weren't really welcoming people, like, outsiders coming in to do this. And so often workers themselves would say these things to scare people that were on the job, right? Because
Right.
the majority of workers working on these tombs were people of Egyptian extraction. So they were speaking Arabic, they were speaking. So, I mean, you might have had one in your entire group of, non-Egyptian people that understood the language or even spoke the language. And so I think that some of this kind of gets lost in translation, but I also think they used it to their own benefit as well, right? To sort of put that fear in place because they didn't want tombs to be robbed. And even the museum at the time in Cairo was, getting in on this, right? Like they didn't want people removing artifacts. Over the Victorian era, especially, I mean, Napoleon showed up in Egypt and shot the face off of the Sphinx, essentially, his soldiers, destroying this incredible piece of art that had been there for several centuries, actually probably at that point thousands of years, and yet we've got Napoleon's soldiers in the matter of a week firing, using it as target practice and
Mhm.
completely disfiguring it. So we have all of this sort of outside people not really respecting any of this, right? So they are literally grave robbing themselves. They're going in there, they're looking for treasures. Those treasures are being bought by museums around the world. They're filling their pockets with money. And, again, we're desecrating tombs. Okay. So we have to kind of look at it in terms of, how would we feel if some people from Egypt came here and started digging up our cemeteries and removing our loved ones and, whatever might happen to have gone into the casket with them. Look at what I've got, diamond engagement rings and all of these things, right? A couple of silicone boobs, whatever, but it's the same thing, but people don't look at it like that. Like for some reason, they think that going to other countries and excavating and going in and removing artifacts and doing all this is okay because it's done in the name of history and science. And as an archaeologist, I'm more of a conservationist now and a researcher than I am wanting to remove items from sites. I don't think we need to do that anymore. I mean, it depends on what's there. If we just find a hoard or a cache of jewelry like the Saxon hoard, okay, there is no burial attached to that, and we're not digging up any bodies. So sure, Roman coins that are found in the ground, bags of coins, things like that. But if we're getting into digging up actual bodies and, burial sites and that, we have to look at it in the context of how upset people would get if that was reversed. So I can
Sure.
imagine the screaming and all the other things that would go on. So this was happening then too. I mean, this was not, this dig in particular was at a time where there wasn't a great relationship with the UK and Egypt or outside people in general after the First World War. And so you were there on expressed agreement with the Egyptian government and that to do and undertake these digs. So there was a lot of restrictions even in place then. But let's kind of look at some of the sort of things that go along with the curse, right? Because I mean, there's been sort of a number of different
Well, just the main people involved with the
yeah,
excavation.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
you know, Carter passed away, Carnarvon passed away, several others involved with the actual dig passed away. And so here you've got this curse coming forward. And there was even a rumor that inside the tomb there was hieroglyphs stating that anyone who dared desecrate the tomb would fall to the curse of the pharaoh. And I even read that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote some kind of article about the dig, which just fueled the curse, completely.
Right.
But of course, in